Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is May 16th. Well, this has been a very big week for me because I started working with my student gardeners. And this year I have about 30 kids signed up between my Maple Grove location and then the Wyoming location just north of Forest Lake. It's always so fun to have some of the kids return from last year and see how much they've grown and matured. Just last night, I got a chance to work with two young gals that had worked at the cabin garden last year. And so it was great to see them again. And it's also really nice for me too, because then I have a few kids that already know the lay of the land and they also know how I like to work. And so that just helps everything get started very smoothly. Now, this year, as with previous years, I have some siblings. And I always ask, do you want to work together with your sibling or do you guys want to be separated? And it really depends. The relationship that they have, they may not get along or they may prefer to branch out and meet new people. But in general, my strategy in the garden is to pair the students up into teams of two. You know the old saying, many hands make light work? Well, that is a philosophy that I use in the garden. Sometimes projects can feel a little daunting, or if there's heavy work, it can just feel like it's too much for one person. But when you've got somebody to share the work with, it makes everything much more doable. You know, the other thing that working in a team does in the garden is that it fosters a spirit of cooperation. And I think it also instills a bigger sense of pride in what you accomplish in the garden. It's great to feel cooperation in the garden instead of competition, which is what kids are used to experiencing in a school environment or in a sports environment. But in the garden, there is no competition. It's all about cooperation. And so I really want to nurture that. Being paired into teams, small groups, is also a natural way to help the kids feel accountable for what they're doing. Because, of course, when you're working with someone else, there's not a ton of time for slacking off or not focusing on the task at hand because you're working with others and you don't want to let them down. You know, another reason why I like to pair the kids up is because when we're in the garden individually, we can get tired eyes or plant blindness. And sometimes we just don't even see the things that we need to be on the lookout for. And so by having a partner in the garden, we can minimize or eliminate altogether some of those common challenges, things that you can hold you back or slow you down in the garden. Sorry, I started chuckling there a little bit. Max is in the office with me today, and he is really tuckered out because when you spend those first full days in the garden, it not only tires you out, but it tires the dog out. And so I've got a little snoring black Labrador at my feet here. So I'm going to try to wake him up a little bit and get him to go snore in the other room. Well, last night up at the cabin garden, one of the jobs that I had my student gardeners work on was pruning the hydrangea. You know, I like to prune the hydrangea right away in the spring, get those old blooms off, and then get them shaped for the coming growth. I've got a couple of different hydrangea up near the front door. I've got a panicled hydrangea that's going to put on tremendous growth. It is in the wrong spot. Just to be blunt, it is not in the right spot, and it's just too big to be near the front door. And yet every year I put off moving it. So what I do instead is I prune it back severely. And so what I had the guys do last night is I had them go back 3 leaf sets and take it back that much because I know how much it's going to grow. Another reason why I don't like it near the front door is all of the wasp and bee activity that the panicled hydrangeas draw compared to the other types of hydrangea, like the French hydrangea or the smooth hydrangea. They don't seem to draw as much bee and wasp activity. And it's really the wasps that bother me. I don't want that by my front door. So we'll see. Maybe I'll get it moved this summer, maybe not. But in any case, it is a great plant, a great shrub for me to teach some pruning to my student gardeners. So that's what they were doing. They were cutting back the hydrangea in anticipation of all of the growth that's going to happen. And then it also makes them more shapely and just really helps clean up that front garden bed in front of the porch. There's something else that I do with my student gardeners that you may want to employ this year for yourself as you're working in the garden. And that is that I set my Apple Watch to go off about every 15 minutes so that I can change up the tasks that they're performing. And in this way, they don't get too bored and they don't get too frustrated with tasks that they're doing in the garden. So there's always something new on the horizon. So for instance, we have these white pines up at the cabin, and this year they just had tremendous pine cone shed. And so we had so many pine cones on the ground all around the area where we work by the potting bench. And so I had one of my student gardeners raking away these pine cones. But, if I would have had him do that for 2 hours, that would have been a total drag. But 15 minutes of that, and then we move on to something else. And slowly but surely, week by week, we will tackle these pine cones and we will clear out that area. But we got started on it last night. And then in that way, he could move on to other activities. And he got to learn a little bit about pine cones and white pines, and also how I like to use them as compost in the garden. So it's a win-win. But my point in sharing this with you is that just like these student gardeners, we can get bored and over-fatigued and overtaxed, overworked in the garden. And sometimes when you hyper-focus on just one thing in the garden, you can miss the big picture. You can miss other tasks that need your attention. So try that little trick. Set your Apple Watch or set a timer for 15 minutes, work in a space, and then go find something else to do. And do that every 15 minutes for 2 hours. And I guarantee you, you will feel a greater sense of accomplishment, but also, I think, experience a little more joy, a little more happiness with what's going on in the garden. Here's a little thought that I had the other morning as I was out in the garden. And that is, don't forget that when you're out in the garden this spring, that you are reconnecting with nature. For many of us who have been cooped up in our homes for 6 months, and now we're out there again, and we want everything to be in our control. But we are in a partnership when we are out in the garden, and that partnership is with Mother Nature. Mother Nature has the power to wipe out all of our hard work, but she also has the power to help us find healing, to help us restore our sense of balance, to help us anchor ourselves in this crazy world of high tech. And so keep that in mind. Keep that front and center when you're outside, that you are there, that you are having a relationship with the planet and with Mother Nature. And that relationship has a tight hold on our hearts. And it doesn't take much to tap in to that secret power, that primal desire that we all have to spend time in nature. It soothes the soul. It is grounding. And the student gardeners that I work with feel that too. In fact, one year, I'll never forget, we'd been working in the garden for about a month. And one of my student gardeners looked at me and he said, I didn't think that I would like working outside as much as I do. And now I'm rethinking that I want to be outside when I work as an adult. And so I'm rethinking everything about what I thought I wanted to do after college. And so I thought that was so powerful. So many times we don't think about the location of our work. We think location, location, location if we're in real estate or we're selling a home. But when it comes to being outside, We often think of outside time as chore time. We have to walk the dog, or we have to take out the trash. But we don't necessarily see it as a place to be productive and as a place to find meaning. And so I look back on that little exchange with my student gardener, and I see it as so insightful and so revealing. Well, as the gardening season kicks into high gear, it can be all-consuming, and that means sometimes for Max and I that we're spending less time on our nature walks in the woods. But we did have a chance to get out a little bit last week, and we went down a path that we like to go through a wooded area near my home, and it was such a reminder of all of the different activity that's going on in our woodlands right now in spring with these beautiful ephemerals that are popping up. And of course, they just kind of flash. They're so dainty and they're such a welcome sight, but unfortunately, they don't last for long. So if you get a chance, head out to your woods and see what you can see. Can you find some bloodroot or mayapple? Maybe you'll stumble on some Dutchman's breeches. They're one of my favorite woodland flowers to run across. Or maybe you'll run into a patch of spring beauty, Claytonia virginica, with its small star-like flowers. Just incredible. And then trout lily or the dogtooth violet is always fun to run into, in addition to trilliums. Trilliums are having their moment right now. So there's so much to see on your woodland walks right now. And don't forget that when you see these native wildflowers in bloom in your woods or your meadows, wherever you happen to be walking, oftentimes the bees will set up shop very near this little clump of flowers so that they can be near that source of nectar and pollen. And so you'll see all kinds of insects drawn to these wildflowers. You'll see early butterflies. You'll see gnats. You'll see bee flies. You'll see those green metallic bees and bumblebees and mining bees. The list is long. So make sure you bring your iPhone. Take some pictures. If you see some flowering wildflowers and you're not sure what they are, your iPhone can identify those now. You just hit the little information button on the photo and then scroll down and it will ask you if you need help identifying that plant. Such a great feature. I think they have it on Android as well as iOS, Apple. So there you go. But anyway, just a few thoughts on spending time in the woodlands if you get a chance this spring. Hey, you know what else we're thinking about doing here in Maple Grove is installing a shed. And I am so excited about it. Of course, I want to make it into a she shed, but I will have to tiptoe my way in that direction. So right now I am just looking at all different types of possibilities, and I am researching sheds and I am cobbling together different ideas that I like. But if you have a she shed and you've made some good decisions or you're happy with how you put it together, please reach out to me and share your best tips and your best practices. I would love to hear what's working for you and what you especially like about how you designed your shed. The other thing that I wanted to share with you is there is a website where you can get hardware for your home, not only for your shed, but for everything. And it's one of my favorites. And I was looking at their garden hardware, their gate latches and such, and it's Van Dyke's Restorers. So I'm on their mailing list. I get their catalogs. I also get their email updates. But I love looking at hardware. And so I just thought I would share that with you in the event that you're trying to find something rustic for some of your outdoor pieces. So it's called Van Dyke's Restorers, and you can get a catalog sent to your house, and you can also subscribe to their mailing list online. But it's a great resource, just outstanding. All right, it's time for today's garden history. All right, we kick off today's garden history by remembering William Henry Seward, who was born on this day, May 16th, back in 1801. William was an American politician. He was the United States Secretary of State from 1861 to 1869. He served as the governor of New York. He was a United States Senator, and he was also featured in the book by Doris Kearns Goodwin called Team of Rivals, the political genius of Abraham Lincoln. But there was this little excerpt about Seward in Doris's book that I wanted to share with you because William was a naturalist. He loved his garden. And I loved this little passage that shared so many insights into William as a nature lover and as a gardener. So just to set this up, this is taking place during the Civil War. There's a little break in the action for Seward, and he accompanies his wife, Frances, and their daughter back to Auburn, New York, where they were planning to spend the summer. So here's what Doris writes. Seward accompanied Frances and Fanny back to Auburn. For a few precious days, he entertained old friends, caught up on his reading, and tended his garden. The soul-trying event was the decision to fell a favorite old poplar tree that had grown unsound. Frances could not bear to be present as it was cut, certain that she should, quote, feel every stroke of the axe. Once it was over, however, she could relax in the beautiful garden that she had sorely missed during her prolonged stay in Washington. Nearly 60 years old, with the vitality and appearance of a man half his age, Seward typically rose at 6 a.m. when first light slanted into the bedroom window of his 20-room country home. Rising early always allowed him time to complete his morning constitutional through his beloved garden before the breakfast bell was rung. Situated on better than 5 acres of land, the Seward mansion was surrounded by manicured lawns, elaborate gardens, and walking paths that wound beneath elms, mountain ash, evergreens, and fruit trees. Decades earlier, Seward had supervised the planting of every one of those trees, which now numbered in the hundreds. He had spent thousands of hours fertilizing and cultivating his flowering shrubs, and with what he called a lover's interest, he inspected them daily. And then I love what Doris writes here because she's contrasting Seward with Abraham Lincoln in terms of their love of working outside. So she writes, Seward's horticultural passion was in sharp contrast to Lincoln's lack of interest in planting trees or growing flowers at his Springfield home. Having spent his childhood laboring long hours on his father's struggling farm, Lincoln found little that was romantic or recreational about tilling the soil. But when Seward came into the table, his son Frederick recalled, quote, he would announce that the hyacinths were in bloom, or that the bluebirds had come, or whatever change the morning had brought. And it was on this day, May 16th in 1809, that Martha Ballard recorded her work as an herbalist and midwife. For 27 years, Martha kept a journal of her work as the town healer and midwife for Hallowell, Maine. Today, Martha's marvelous journal gives us a glimpse into the plants that she regularly used and how she applied them medicinally. And as for how Martha sourced her plants, she raised them in her garden, or she foraged for them in the wild. As the village apothecary, she found her own ingredients and personally made all of her herbal remedies. And here's what the writer Laurel Thatcher Ulrich wrote about Martha's work back in May of 1809. Martha's expansive record focused on the mundane work of gardening, the daily incremental tasks that each season extracted. In May of 1809, she sowed, set, planted, and transplanted in at least half a dozen places, digging ground west of the house on May 15th and starting squash, cucumbers, and muskmelons and watermelons on the east side of the house the same day. She planted by the hog pen on May 16th and 18th, and on May 23rd, she sowed string peas, quote, on the north end of my garden. And that possessive pronoun, my garden, was the only hint of the sense of ownership that she felt in her work. The garden was hers, though her husband or son or the Hallowell and Augusta Bank owned the land. Laurel concludes, the garden was hers because she turned the soil, she dropped the seeds, and each year she recorded in her diary, as though it had never happened before, the recurring miracle of spring. And it was on this day, May 16th in 1899, that Luigi Fenaroli, the great Italian agronomist and botanist, was born. He wrote A Flora of the Alps. He was an expert in forestry, but today we remember him for his work with chestnuts. Luigi wrote 2 books on chestnuts, and he was passionate about chestnuts as a good source of nutrition, especially for people who lived in the mountains. Although, of course, chestnuts are beloved in Italy as well as other parts of the world. Chestnuts are unique in that they contain very little fat and protein compared to other types of nuts, but they are an excellent source of both carbohydrate and water. They're about a 50-50 ratio there. And so it's not surprising to learn that Roman soldiers were given a porridge made of chestnuts before they went into battle. It gave them sustenance. Chestnut porridge. Today, chestnuts are known as a superfood. They are healthy and irresistibly tasty, and so they rank near the top of the list when we think of nutritious snacks. And today we remember Herbert Ernest Bates, who went with the pen name H.E. Bates. He was an English author, and he was born on this day, May 16th, in 1905. Herbert is remembered for his books Love for Lydia, which came out in 1952, The Darling Buds of May, which came out in 1958, and My Uncle Silas, which was one of his earliest books. It came out in 1939. In his book, A Love of Flowers, that debuted in 1971, Herbert wrote, "It is wonderful to think that one of the few unbroken links between the civilization of ancient Egypt and the civilization of today is the garden." Herbert also wrote, "I shut my eyes and it returns, the evocation of a whole wood, a whole world of darkness and flowers and birds and late summer silence, more than a mere memory of a wood, the first and best wood." Herbert wrote about gardeners. He said, "The true gardener, like an artist, is never satisfied." And he also once wrote this about gardens. "Gardens should be like lovely, well-shaped girls, all curves, secret corners, unexpected deviations, seductive surprises, and then still more curves." H.E. Bates. And it was on this day, May 16th, back in 1926, that the state of Kentucky selected the goldenrod for its floral emblem. Prior to 1926, Kentucky's floral emblem had been the bluegrass, which seems more fitting still today. But Kentucky garden clubs felt that bluegrass wasn't representative of the whole state. And so, consequently, Kentucky is in good company because both Alabama and Nebraska picked the goldenrod to be the state flower. Now, goldenrod has a lot of haters because many people confuse it for ragweed. I hate to even say that because it makes people think that they must look similar, but that's just not true. In fact, once you see goldenrod and then ragweed individually, you could never confuse them. Don't believe me? Just Google it. Ragweed's flowers are green. They're not eye-catching, but goldenrod flowers are golden, and they're very pretty. This reminds me that I saw an infographic a few years ago that said, goldenrod warning. If I'm here, so is ragweed. So stay indoors. And then it added, achoo, like you're sneezing. This is clearly misleading because it might as well say, the black-eyed Susans are blooming, so is ragweed. Or Joe Pyeweed is blooming, so is ragweed. It's just an issue of timing. So all the late summer bloomers, echinacea, helenium, oriental lily, asters, sedums, autumn crocus, hydrangeas, the list goes on and on. Just because they're in bloom during that time of year with the ragweed doesn't make them bad. And so goldenrod needs a full-on PR campaign to be put in the camp with other late summer bloomers. You know, the genus name for goldenrod is Solidago, and it's taken from a Latin term, insolidum ego vulnera, and that means I make wounds whole. And so it's not surprising to learn that Native Americans and herbalists have long recognized the curative power of goldenrod when it comes to wound care. Now, if you want to plant some goldenrod, keep in mind that it is an early autumn bloomer or late summer bloomer. So that makes it an important food source for honeybees. And by the way, it's also a fantastic cut flower. So if you have a cutting flower garden, be sure to include goldenrod. Now, the botanical painter Anne Ophelia Todd Dowden painted the goldenrod, and she made a great observation about this flower. And I thought it was a great way to end this little segment on goldenrod. She once said, "Abundant it may be, but repugnant it is not." Perfectly said. It's time for today's book. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book of Rhubarb and Roses, The Telegraph Book of the Garden by Tim Richardson. Well, this is such a happy and fun book for gardeners in the summertime. I love the cover. It shows a gentleman sleeping on a garden bench. He's got a little golden tabby cat. Beneath him, there's a lawnmower, there's a wheelbarrow full of produce, there's beautiful garden beds, there's a beautiful garden arbor, and then, of course, there's a little paper, a newspaper of the Daily Telegraph that's laid out on the wheelbarrow, right by the tomatoes and the carrots and the cabbage and so forth. But this is a book that the Telegraph put together, and it is a compilation book. It's an anthology of garden writers. And so in this book, you will find fantastic garden essays from the likes of Stephen Lacey, Mary Keene, Bunny Guinness, Sarah Raven, Rosemary Very, and the like. Now here's what Tim wrote in the introduction to this book. He said, "What to expect trawling through every piece of garden writing in the Daily Telegraph's history. I'm not quite sure what I was anticipating. I'm not sure either that I was quite ready for the fact that a garden column appeared in the newspaper every single day from the late 1950s on. That's a lot of garden writing. But he writes, the result was a bulging file after file brought up from the telegraph's distant archive, each filled to bursting with carefully snipped clippings. Snow, drought, storm, new plants launched, old plants rediscovered. The garden columnist falls upon everything that makes one year different to the last. For with a cyclical subject such as horticulture, there is an ever-present danger of repeating oneself. The Telegraph's writers have avoided this for the most part, although I was amused to come across at least 4 versions of May I Introduce You to Euphorbias, and this was a piece that was written by the same author 4 times. One of the fascinations of gardening is the way the same issues arise year after year, while always seeming different somehow, perhaps because of the vagaries of the seasons. Thomas walks us through some of the history of garden writing over at the Telegraph, and he concludes with these words: the best writers achieve a balance between practical advice and lyrical appreciation of the garden, all to a strict deadline. And I suppose that this theme of writing to order looms large for me today, since the deadline for the introduction to this book is suddenly upon me, and I find myself writing during a weekend away. As it happens, the place is Sissinghurst, and the borrowed desk I am sitting at was Vita's. My view through casement windows, that of burnished orange echinacea, crimson salvias, clipped yew, and the wondering smiles of visitors gliding by. Their expression makes me think, does anything in life give as much pleasure as a beautiful garden? Last night, the white garden at midnight was a revelation, but that is not a subject to be enlarged upon now. I'm going to write it up in the next day or 2. It will, I hope, become another garden article fit for publication in the pages of the Daily Telegraph. Well, if you like garden writing and you love anthologies, this is the perfect book for you. I think this is a great summer gift for gardeners because this book has already been out a decade already. It came out in 2013, and so used copies are readily available on Amazon. But again, this is a beautiful and fun book. One reviewer wrote, "It's an assorted box of chocolates. I happily skipped between essays by the likes of Vita Sackville West, Germaine Greer, and Sir Roy Strong, greedily consuming one after the other in quick succession. And for those with more restraint, this is a book that promises many hours of savored garden delights." This book is 464 pages of funny and well-informed garden writing dating back to the 1950s. You can get a copy of Rhubarb and Roses, the Telegraph Book of the Garden by Tim Richardson, and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $2. It's a fantastic summer book for gardeners. All right, we end the show today with a sweet little letter that was written by a Union captain in the Civil War by the name of Jacob Rittner. In fact, there's a great book that features all of his letters that he wrote to his wife Emmeline during the Civil War, and it's called Love and Valor. It's by Charles Larimer, and the subtitle is Intimate Civil War Letters Between Captain Jacob and Emmeline Rittner. And it is a great book, primarily because it contrasts what was going on during the Civil War on the battlefield and what was going on back home on the home front. Anyway, I stumbled on this letter that Jacob wrote on this day during the Civil War when I was reading an excerpt from a book by D.C. Gill called How We Are Changed by War. And in this excerpt, he was talking about how soldiers survived the war, not only physically, but also mentally. In his book, he quotes Kirby Farrell, who wrote, "To preserve their sanity, soldiers often concentrated on a prosthetic reality to ground themselves." And we already know that the garden is grounding. DC writes, "An artificial image of home can substitute for the deficiencies of a present-day environment, such as a war zone. It allowed soldiers to mentally project themselves into a more comforting geography." And so now we arrive at the power of the garden, whether you are in your garden right now or whether you are indoors and you are imagining your garden, you are conjuring your garden, because even doing that, thinking about your happy place in the garden is powerful and is grounding. And so it was on this day, May 16th, back in 1861, that Jacob Rittner wrote to his wife, and he is asking her to help ground him, to help provide an anchor during the storm and uncertainty of war. And he writes, "Now, Emmeline dear, you must write me a great long letter next Sunday. Tell me all the news, how the trees grow, the garden, and the grass, and what everybody says." So there you go, the power of the garden to anchor us. Isn't that sweet? And so powerful, sweet and so powerful. Well, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening to The Daily Gardener. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Maybe you can start to do a morning walk through your garden like William Seward, or maybe you can start to keep a garden diary like the midwife and herbalist Martha Ballard. And of course, I hope that you're able to find that sense of balance and that sense of place that can come from spending time in the garden, or even, as we learned from Captain Rittner, just spending time thinking about your garden. It's all good. And just a reminder that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.